Good evening, members. It's 7:15. I'd like to start the meeting. Can I welcome all the members of the public to our meeting this evening? And before I start, can I just remind everyone, please can you switch off your mobile phones? And in the event of the fire alarm going, it would be a genuine fire. There's no practice plan. Could I ask you to leave by the door opposite me or by the main entrance in the main hall? That's the end of the public pieces. Item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Bowers, and he has been substituted by Councillor Hensman, and everyone else is here, plus half the planning team this evening. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda, having regard to the Code of Conduct members? No. Item 3, members, I have the minutes of the 28th of March. Is it your wish that I sign them as a true copy? If so, could someone move that, please?
Move as a great record, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Does it find a seconder? It does in two places. All those in favour that I sign them as a true record? Thank you, members. Now come on to item 4, public question time. We have no general questions this evening. Those people wishing to make a statement will make the statement prior to the application which they wished to make the statement on. So that brings us up to item 5, planning applications. The first application, 5A, is application number 22000450 full, 31A Julian Court Road, Braintree. And I do have a speaker on this application. In fact, I have 3 speakers on this application. And the first person wishing to make a statement this evening, pieces of paper everywhere, is Mr. Ako Lamafe. I'm so sorry. Would you like to come to the table and make your statement? You have 3 minutes.
Good evening, sirs and madams. My wife and I were here seeking a variation of the planning decision in a bid to protect our home from harm. Our home was built in the 60s and has been our home for 18 years now. It is situated a metre below the ground level of the proposed plot 1, bearing in mind that plot 1 is the lowest level of all 3 plots and is also less than 20 meters distance from the foundation of our home. A previous development on the east side of this development in 2014 caused significant flooding to our garden, but thankfully it was not near to our house. This proposed development poses a greater risk to us because of the natural spring situated on the site and the proximity to our house. This is not a pond on the site. It's not a water course either. It is a spring, which implies that this is where a body of water originates from. If it was a water course, its entry and exit will be predictable and therefore easier to manage. Based on the recent borehole reports and historical evidence of the previous development, a pile foundation will most likely be required. I quote from the report: the council safeguarding maps have identified a critical drainage area outside of, but adjacent to the site. The exit of this large body of water is our land, which is adjacent to the site. The planning decision and the civil and structural engineer have focused solely on the development site and the safeguarding of the 3 plots. We have evidence to you on video how the spring water enters our property. If these currently controlled entries and there are many of them, are disrupted, it will be disastrous for us. We do not oppose the development, we did not oppose the development in 2014 at all. Neither do we oppose this development in totality. We are here seeking a compromise that allows development of plot 2 and 3, but a refusal of plot 1. If plot 1 was granted permission, it will be helpful to know who will be liable if we suffer any damages. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for making your statement. The next person wishing to make a statement on this application is Mr. Matthew Dawes. He is also an objector. Thank you, Mr. Dawes, and good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
Would you like to just put the mic, press the right hand? That's lovely, thank you.
So, on behalf of myself and my family, I would like to put on record our long-term objection to any plans for building on this small piece of land. We object on the basis of the following risk factors which the developer has naturally sought to counter, but which have not been resolved for effective risk management or mitigation strategies. This is a proposal for irresponsible backland development, the only benefit being financial gain. It is a proposal opposed by every resident in the area, aside from 3 households that will be gaining financially. I live in Thorpe Lodge, the listed property next to 31A. Approving these plans will change the historic setting of our property. The plans refer to a substantial build-up of trees between Thorpe Lodge and 31A. Let me please be clear, the plans seek to show these as trees. They are not. They are overgrown shrubs which are not evergreen. When pruned or in winter, they give barely any cover. The proposed plans to construct a fence is positioned exactly where these shrubs are rooted. This contradiction needs to be highlighted. Are the developers saying the fence will provide adequate cover, or the shrubs? How is the developer going to erect a fence on top of the shrubs? Secondly, is the remaining unmitigated risk to protect the mature oak trees to the rear of Thorpe Lodge, and also the removal of the vast majority of existing trees on the development plot. It has to be acknowledged that these protected trees are at risk, especially given that other protected oak trees in the area have already been lost as a result of backland filling. In the northeastern corner of the site plan in the area titled Landscaping Area of Ecological and Biodiversity Gain stands one of the oak trees with a TPO. There is a plan to crown this tree and there's simply no need to. I would like at the very least this crowning to be removed from the proposal by the committee. There is simply no justification for it. The entire development will require a huge number of established trees to be removed completely, which is a terrible state of affairs. The developers have sought to mitigate this by simply saying they will plant new ones. It is a fact that newly planted trees will take decades to grow to their full carbon absorbing potential. Third is the remaining unmitigated risk to established wildlife. Badgers, bats, owls, deer, snakes, shrews, foxes, mice will all lose their habitats. Again, the developers have sought to lessen this risk by simply stating to protect the bats they will erect bat boxes. From research undertaken, the success rate of a bat box is 20 to 32%.
Mr. Dawes, I'm sorry, but you've had your 3 minutes, and we have had your statement in writing, so I have to ask you to cease now.
Could I have a couple more minutes
No,
just to
I'm
conclude?
sorry. No, it's 3 minutes. I'm sorry. I let you go over and finish your last 2 sentences. We have got everything in writing, and we have read it.
I believe when the bell went for the last gentleman, though, he was able
I let
to
him
read on.
finish his sentence. I've let you finish yours about the bats. I never try to stop anyone mid-term, but you can...
Could I just at least conclude?
Joe, just give me your conclusion, because it's only a few seconds.
This proposal offers no benefit whatsoever to the local community. Indeed, 42 objections have been filed. That is every single household which either borders the development or whose life and property is going to be negatively affected by the development. Only 3 households have not objected. We believe that this is backland just backland development basically. Development is a case in point for it, and we hope that this brief statement is helps to identify it to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, we have received all your paperwork, which you have sent us by email. Thank you. The next person wishing to make a statement on this application is Mr. Philip Barton, and he is for the applicant and agent. Good evening, Mr. Barton. I'll remind you, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Philip Barton, of DJ Barton Associates, consultant civil engineer, and excuse me. With the issue of the spring, the water that forms a spring typically originates from rainwater that infiltrates into the soil and then percolates down through permeable layers of rock, sand and gravel until it reaches an impermeable layer such as clay. At that point, the water is forced to move laterally along the impermeable layer until it reaches a point where it can emerge at the surface, which in this case is the head of a ditch watercourse that then conveys it down to the River Blackwater. The Leeds Local Flood Authority have been issued with a site investigation factual report arising from the borehole testing and have further confirmed that they have no objection to the proposed development. The Leeds Local Flood Authority are the Land Drainage Authority. It can be seen from historical maps that the ditch watercourse that begins within the proposed site, which has the spring pool at the head of it, has been recorded on maps since 1881 and possibly even previously. The purpose of this ditch is to convey surface water, groundwater, which spring is groundwater, and land drainage discharges downstream to the River Blackwater. In accordance with the Land Drainage Acts, the riparian owners, in this case the owners of the properties the watercourse runs through, has a responsibility to accept upstream flows of water through their land via the watercourse, even if any excess water is caused by inadequate capacity downstream. However, it is also the responsibility of all the downstream riparian owners to ensure that the stretches of watercourse that they are responsible for are clear of any debris, whether it is man-made obstruction or natural obstruction. Man-made obstructions could include grass cuttings, litter or any structure that has been installed and restricts the flow of water. Altering the natural cross-section of the watercourse, redirecting or restricting the flow of the watercourse without prior permission from the Land Drainage Authority is in contravention of the Land Drainage Act, and the Land Drainage Authority have enforcement powers in this regard. It is our understanding that the neighbours to the north of the site has had previous bad experiences from other developments in the surrounding area, causing water to run across his garden. The properties that cause the issues do not appear to have had a ditch that begin in the water within the site to safely convey the water downstream. The proposed development site does have a watercourse which has the purpose of conveying water safely downstream in accordance with the Land Drainage Act and the previous acts that it supersedes.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mr. Barton. That brings us to the end of people wishing to make a statement on this application. We'll now go to the presentation, which is going to be made by Juliet. Thank you, Juliet.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. So this is an application at 31A Juliant Court Road for the construction of 3 bungalows within the garden and a new access off Beaufort Gardens. Members will recall that this application was considered by the Planning Committee in December last year and was deferred as members sought further clarification as to the location of the natural spring at the site and how this would impact on the neighbouring properties. So just to remind members of the site context, the site is situated within the defined development boundary and has no specific allocation on the proposal's map of the adopted local plan. Planning permission has previously been refused on the site back in 2017 for the erection of 4 two-storey dwellings with access proposed between 31A and 33 Julian Court Road, which was here. So that was the previous application. This current scheme has proposed to move the access to off Beaufort Gardens between properties 13 and 15, so up here. The scheme has also been reduced to 3 single-storey dwellings. 33 Julian Court Road is Grade 2 listed. and that's that property there. And the site is bounded by 8 residential properties. Julian Court Road is at an elevated level to the site itself. The site is currently a mature garden, and there are 2 large oak trees which we can see on the plan. So these 2 here, and this one has a TPO order on it. There is a public right-of-way which is indicated by this green dotted line here to the east of the site, and that dissects across the proposed access. This is the proposed site plan. During the course of the application, the scheme has reduced from 4 dwellings to 3. This was primarily to address the concerns raised by the Heritage Officer regarding the impact on the setting of the listed building at number 33, which is, we can see the garden for number 33 here. The proposed access of Beaufort Gardens is 5.5 metres wide with a size 3 turning area. And with the public footpath here dissecting across the access, there are rumble strips proposed on either side. I should just say the Highway Authority have raised no objection to the scheme in terms of highway points. We can see the natural spring on the site here, which is proposed to be retained, and this is in front of plot 1. As we've heard, a neighbouring resident has raised concern regarding the impact of the development and the natural spring on their property. They've also raised concern that the lead local flood authority have stated in their consultation response that due consideration should be given to the sequential tests in relation to fluvial flooding. The site is situated within flood zone 1, and the planning practice guidance states you don't need to do a sequential test for development in flood zone 1 unless there are flooding issues in the area of development. The strategic flood risk assessment for the Braintree district, which forms part of the evidence base for the local plan, identifies that the site is situated adjacent to an ordinary watercourse and within a medium/high risk of probability of flooding from surface water. Following the member deferral of the application, the impact of flooding from surface water has been considered further, and officers have liaised with the applicant and the lead local flood authority. A borehole investigation was carried out in February this year at the request of the lead local flood authority, and a letter was also received from the applicant's civil and structural engineering consultants, DJ Barton, who we've heard from tonight, with comments regarding surface water and flood management on the site. I've highlighted some of the key summary points made in the letter received from DJ Barton, structural engineers. Just to point out some of them, they state that the purpose of the ditch course is to convey surface water, groundwater and land drainage discharges downstream to the River Blackwater. They also refer to the neighbours' concerns regarding water running across their land and state that the properties that cause the issues do not appear to have a water course starting within their sites, and therefore the situations are different. The proposed site does have a watercourse which has the purpose of conveying water safely downstream. They have proposed measures to be undertaken by the contractor during construction relating to surface water runoff, and they've also referred to the provision of a construction surface water management plan. The lead local flood authority have reviewed the borehole investigation report and the letter from DJ Barton, and they've raised no objection subject to the measures detailed in the surface water drainage strategy and maintenance management strategy being carried out. So just to refresh members on the elevations and floor plans proposed that have been submitted. This is the proposed floor plan, roof plan and elevation submitted for plot 1. It's a 2-bedroom dwelling with a single attached garage. The overall height to the ridge is 6 metres. The proposed dwellings accord with the nationally described space standards, and there's sufficient amenity space proposed and car parking provision to comply with the standards. These are the plans submitted for plot 2, identical to plot 1 in terms of size and layout. The appearance differs in that this is proposed with a rendered finish. And these are the plans submitted for plot 3, again similar to plot 1 and 2, however there's a double garage proposed here, and the finish proposed is a red brick. Plot 3 is the property that's situated on the boundary with the listed property at number 33, Julian Court Road. Here's the landscaping plan that's been submitted. The proposal does require the removal of 17 trees. The 2 Category A oak trees, so here and here, are proposed to be retained. And there is mitigation planting proposed, including beech and silver birch trees. The landscaping officer has been consulted and has raised no objection to the proposal. So looking at the site photographs now. So the top left-hand photo here is taken at the approximate location of plot 3, looking northwards towards the proposed area of biodiversity net gain. And then the bottom left photograph is taken from Julian Court Road between 31A and 33, and the listed building is just visible here. So on this one here, so the top photograph is taken looking southwards towards the boundary with the listed property. We can see it's quite an established vegetated boundary, and the willow tree here is proposed to be retained. And the top photograph here is taken looking towards the proposed access into the site. And then the bottom one is taken sort of looking northwards, so towards the protected oak tree again. Just looking at the access now. So these are the photographs taken from Beaufort Gardens. In the top photograph, here we can see number 13, and there's number 15. The access is proposed in between these 2 properties, and we can just see the safety railings here for the public right-of-way, which will dissect across the access, and that's seen a bit clearer in these photographs here. So the public footpath goes north and in a southerly direction as well. And then we have got some pictures of the natural spring as well in the site. So in terms of the planning balance, there would be a loss of trees to facilitate the development. This does weigh against the proposal. However, it's considered that any adverse impact in relation to the removal of lower quality tree can be mitigated through planting and additional landscaping. In terms of public benefits, the site is within the development boundary in a sustainable location. It would also deliver 3 market dwellings and would provide associated economic and social benefits during construction and following occupation and supporting local facilities, albeit limited. So in conclusion, officers are satisfied that implementing the measures as detailed in the surface water drainage strategy and maintenance management strategy would reduce the risk of on and off-site flooding. The Leith Local Flood Authority have raised no objection in that regard. I've detailed on the slide here the 4 conditions proposed relating specifically to surface water drainage. There are 24 conditions proposed in total, and these are detailed on page 14 to 20. So the recommendation is approval subject to these conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliet. Thank you. Councillor Wrench.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I live within a 5-minute walk from this site and do have some concerns, if I'm being honest. And I just want to reiterate some of the comments that were made at public question time there, because the first one is the loss of trees. I've not previously spoken too much about the loss of trees. However, with specifics about the crowning of the tree, is that absolutely necessary, and why does that need to take place? Just to get some clarification on that would be helpful. With regards to the fencing as well, I don't think we've had an answer or reply to that as to why or how is it going to be possible for the fencing to be installed when it is. And also the protection of Fort Lodge, what mitigation has been put in place. Could you just clarify that to ensure that that listed building remains its character? Because I think it's fair to say the plot that it's being established on, most people would be envious to have a garden like that, and it's quite disappointing to see that small area of land is being developed into 3 bungalows. And I think from our first speaker as well, the liability of damage, I believe it was mentioned how that maybe would be liable for the owners, but is that correct? Because I'm not sure they'd be too forthcoming to deal with that, because the area there's the whole estate is covered with underground springs, and there are issues across the whole estate with that happen quite regularly, and I'm just not sure how often enforcement action is ever taken against homeowners because of that. So that would be interesting to know, is that likely to happen, and who would be absolutely liable for any damage. And I did hear at the end of the first speaker as well about the possibility of going ahead with plot 2 and 3, I believe, and maybe not plot 1. But my understanding would be that we can't pick and choose here. We'd have to either refuse the whole site or approve all of them. So if you could just clarify that point as well. Thank you.
I'd like to come back, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just in relation to your last point, that's correct. It would be a case of approving the scheme as submitted. We wouldn't be possible to reduce by removing plot 1. In regards to the first question regarding the oak tree, so this, I believe it's this one here we're talking about. I believe the crown was originally proposed to be lifted as there was a dwelling originally there. As that dwelling has now been removed, I don't think it would be necessary for that to be lifted now, and the oak tree could probably stay as it is, because it's an area of ecological and biodiversity gain now, a landscaped area. In terms of the fencing and this boundary here that's shared with the with Thorpe Lodge, the listed property, we did have some quite lengthy discussions with the heritage officer regarding the relationship between the two. What we don't see here is actually there is quite a level change. So the bungalow is actually on plot 3 is quite a bit lower than the listed property. But certainly the intention is to keep the boundary very soft along this section here, and that certainly was what the heritage officer was seeking as well. In response to the liability, I'll pass that one over to Chris. I believe I'll pass it over to you, Chris, if that's okay.
Thank you, Juliet. Good evening, members. So my understanding would be that would be a civil matter, and certainly in terms of the enforcement point with the local legal, I couldn't answer the question in terms of how frequently they would take enforcement action, but my understanding is they'd have to establish the root cause of the issue, but it would ultimately be a civil matter between the properties, and as referenced within public question time, the point is if there's obstructions being caused on a particular site, that can obviously have an impact on others, and that would, I'm assuming that would need to be established. But for this evening, we've obviously got the response from the local legal flood authority following the deferral of the previous application. We're not experts as planning officers in this matter, and that's why we've sought to consult with the local lead flood authority on that, following the further information that's been provided by the applicant agent. So I do appreciate that doesn't provide members possibly with the comfort, and certainly the residents with the comfort, but that would be my understanding. It would be a civil matter, and it would come down to the root cause of the problem if there was an issue in the future, as to establishing that and then taking action accordingly. But we've got to make a decision, or members have got to make a decision rather this evening based on the technical information and the application before you.
Thank you, Chris. Did you wish to come back, Councillor Roach?
Just clarification, sorry if I missed that, about the fence line and the possibility of that being installed. Is that, I just missed, I wasn't 100% clear on the damage to any shrubs that may be taken to get the fence put in.
So we have got conditions on there, condition 8, regarding the means of enclosure, fencing detail, etc. And then a condition relating to, lost it now, condition 17 in relation to the landscaping scheme. And it is, this area here is proposed to be retained as the trees and the hedges. Is that what you were asking?
I'm just
So they're showing that, yeah, these are the existing ones here.
Yeah, I think that covers what.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I think that covers that. But
okay.
yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Mrs. Beavis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and it's a comfort also to hear the comments from Councillor Wrench this evening, who is a local resident, and Chris Paggi said, you know, we're not flooding experts at this local authority, but I think one can, you know, apply a kind of sense of how we feel about things. And, you know, clearly, you know, the site is in our development plan. I'm not, you know, I'm not saying it's not, but I just feel that it is overdevelopment of a site. And what I find quite frustrating, actually, as a gardener myself, actually, that someone's tended that garden for many years. I mean, it's a beautiful garden. There's no getting away from it. And it's very well maintained. And I'm struggling a little bit with the fact that it says they're low-grade quality trees. Well, they were someone's prized, you know, treasured trees that were planted a number of years ago, and probably some of them still, you know, growing to date. The thing I find hard to understand, and this is, you know, on a practical level, and, you know, being, you know, quite a gardener for a number of years, is that trees absorb water. That's what they do. You know, they have to absorb a lot of water to grow. And yet, it seems to me, here we have a site with a natural spring recorded back in 1881 and identified so, with flooding issues, and we understand tonight just not at the site, but actually generally in the area. And we've come back with a report, and certainly more detailed than we've had before, which is good. But I'm just still not convinced, if I'm honest. It just seems to me to be the wrong thing to do, to take out a load of trees, put a load of concrete in, which doesn't absorb water. And actually some of the stuff we're looking at tonight, I wouldn't say was particularly sort of permeable, actually. And I can see water sitting on the top rather than going into the ground. So my gut feeling is, and I obviously need to take some advice from officers, is that we could reject this, we could refuse it this evening, and it could come back to us with less density. And I think for me, that would sit better, because it just seems to me we're going to destroy what has been a lovely outlet probably for many properties. And I'd like to hear from other members, but I can't find myself supporting this application this evening. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Beavers. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, as members know, this application has come back before us because we were uncertain about the whole issue about the spring. And I think we felt that we were not sufficiently had enough understanding really of the issues regarding drainage and that were created by the existence of this spring. But I personally feel quite satisfied now, having received the additional information, from the consulting surveyors, the borehole tests that were carried out, and then having had that reviewed by the lead flood authority. I mean, I think there's clearly a watercourse here that has been here for 150 years, that is designed to ditch effectively that take water down to the River Blackwater, and that is the purpose. That is why that ditch formed. That is the purpose of that ditch, to just direct the water down into the river. For me, the issue regarding drainage is what happens when you build on that bit of land, because obviously the rain is still going to fall on that bit of land, and water is still going to percolate down through the soil towards that spring. And like all other applications, this is a matter of what happens to the surface water, the water that falls on the roofs and the hard, particularly the hard surfaces. And I think looking at what has been proposed for dealing with that, the permeable paving, all the measures for dealing with surface water, I think a lot of thought has been put into this as to how that water is going to be managed, and a lot of measures have been put in place to control the flow of that water downstream, down the hill. And I am satisfied from all the reports that have been written and we've received that the measures that were put in place will address satisfactorily that problem. Obviously, the other site that caused problem for the speaker is a different site with different topographical issues and unrelated, may not be the same as this site at all. So I'm happy to be guided by that. I mean, on the issue of the garden, obviously, yes, beautiful garden, but gardens have to be maintained. If someone's not maintaining a garden, it doesn't remain a beautiful garden. And I think we do have to be guided again by the advice from our landscape officers. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, clearly this is a difficult site because it's been considered before by the council with 4 proposed dwellings and refused, and now we're looking at 3. But for me, as previous speakers have said, I think it's still trying to do a bit too much. I think that's how I'd sum it up. And because it's trying to do too much, there's too many impacts which, as we've heard tonight, residents are concerned about. I did read all the information on the water, but I think the point Councillor Mrs Beavers makes is important. That there isn't one thing that's going to change here. There's several things that's going to change. You have the built development, and one of those plots is actually very close to the spring. And the second thing is the loss of the trees, which do take up a lot of water in themselves. So I don't think anyone can know exactly what the net effect of all of that is going to be. On the loss of the trees, I'm going to say the same as I say at all planning committee meetings. Yet again, we have a report in front of us where officers are saying these are lower quality trees. Every single report we have in front of us justifies removal of trees because they're lower quality. And yet we saw that photograph and they didn't look that bad to me. I mean, obviously I haven't been around and looked at them in detail, but they look reasonable. And yet we have a report again saying lower quality trees lost can be mitigated through new planting. Well, can it actually in this sense? Because there are a lot of trees coming out. I think is it 17 in total? 16, I think. Yeah, and as the landscape officers themselves said, what's going back isn't their best preference as to what might go back. So that is a concern. And another matter, if members are minded to approve it, although I'm not going to support it myself, is condition 12 has reverted to the old wording for protection of bats. That rather confusing wording, which seems to have crept its way back in again. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Mrs Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor Mrs Parker actually summed up very well most of what I was going to say, and I think there are a number of reasons that neighbouring residents are unhappy about this, but we did defer this in order to get more information on the spring and the effect of water from the site. I realise there were other reasons for people being concerned. So the impact of the development on Grade 2 listed building, but we don't have any objection from the heritage consultant. Highways issues around how construction, traffic and so on would manage, but highways, again, are satisfied on that point. And landscape officer also raised no objections. Yes, it is important to save trees and to keep trees, but I think, we know on this committee there are times when in order for a development to go ahead, some trees have to be removed. And I do think that applicants on whole make every effort to try and limit that. And as a committee, we make every effort to try and ensure that happens and that there is mitigation planting. To come back to the issue of the spring, which is why we deferred it in the first place, I'm not going to repeat what Councillor Mrs Parker said, because actually I think she was spot on. We have a very detailed report from the experts pointing out the various differences between this site and previous other sites that have caused problems. and I'm also satisfied with what they have said. All in all, I think we have a report here, and I thank Juliet very much for the work she's done on this, which does answer our questions. And I think, you know, saying that maybe it's still too much density on the site. We've had earlier applications for 4 buildings, 4 dwellings. We've gone down to 3. Is it realistic to expect the developer to come back and say, right, well, we'll go down to 2? I'm not going to answer that question, but I'll just leave it hanging there. We have to make a decision based on what we have before us this evening. So all in all, Chairman, I'm satisfied with this. I will move officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Would that include the condition not to crown the oak tree?
Oh, yes.
And also,
absolutely.
just before I go take your, I asked Chris about condition 12. Have we got the wrong wording?
Apologies, Madam Chairman. Yeah, we can update condition 12 as well with the correct wording. So
Yes, so that's also with condition 12 updated with the correct wording. Does that find a seconder before I move on? Thank you very much. Does anyone else wish to say anything, add anything new further? No. Well, it has been moved and seconded that we grant this application with the new condition not to crown the oak tree that was to be crowned, and for the correct wording on condition 12 regarding bats.
Madam Chairman, could the members please make sure they indicate very clearly how they're voting?
Yes,
please.
All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4.
That application has been granted. Were there any abstentions? Sorry. No, I didn't think there were, having done them. That application has been granted. Thank you, members, and thank you for the members of the public that attended this evening. We now come on to application 5B, application 22016864, Conehouse Station Road, Earls Colne, and also application 22016887, LBC, Conehouse Station Road, Earls Colne. Both of these applications presentation will be made for both of them at the same time, but we will be taking separate votes on those applications. I do have speakers for this application, and the first person wishing to speak is Mr. Rob Packy. He is speaking on behalf of the applicant.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members and officers. My name is Rob Patkai. I'm an architect and I'm Design Director for Kingsley Healthcare, and I'm obviously representing the application. I've got Stephen Butler with me. He's a planning consultant from Bidwells who's worked with us quite hard since 2019 to get to where we are today. Kingsley Healthcare is a family-owned business. We're based in Lowestoft, which is up the road. 34 care homes, but most of them in this region, and quite a lot of them are older care homes, like Colne House. And the thing about a family-owned business is the ethos in that they actually invest in the long term. We have no short-term dividends to pay out, and that's exactly why we're here today, the long term of Colne House care home, which is a Grade 2 listed building. You'll know it's a little bit of a gem. It's in a nice grass setting with a tree buffer surround. It's been extended quite a lot. Not badly, really. The bad bit was the annex, 5-bed annex built at the end of last century, which is, I don't know how it got there, but it's not helpful. And Kingsley bought it as a 33-bed residential home in 2008, so they haven't really added anything to it. This is the time when we need to have to face the future. And you might be aware that there are no purpose-built care homes in Colne, in Earls Colne, and none that provide either nursing or dementia care. And that's simply because you need better facilities. Obviously, it comes with different staffing as well. And you might also know that design for well-being has progressed a lot simply because we know more. We need more space. We need to be able to have infection control, people in smaller units, residential units. They need more individual options for agency, for choice to keep an active life. So the challenge really for us has been to respect this little treasure here and also build a home which actually is fit for the future for the community. And so we think we've come up with a reasonably inventive scheme. We've certainly worked hard, so we won't be criticised for that, hopefully. Three elements to it, really. One is to knock down that annex, which as an architect is music to my ears. Second is to love the existing building, reinstate some rooms inside. It's not big interventions, it's actually reinstatement, which is part of the listed building consent. And the third is to build an extension which is linked underground, and there's a green wall as well, which actually brings back the green buffering of the context. So I hope that you can support it, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. The next person wishing to make a statement on this application is Mr. Stephen Butler, and he's speaking. He's the agent, one of the agents.
Thank you very much, Rob, and good evening, Chair, members and officers. My name is Stephen Butler from Bidwells, and I'm the planning agent representing Kingsley Healthcare in respect of these planning and listed building consent applications. It's important that we plan for the needs of older people. As a proportion of the overall population, the number of over 85s is projected to double between 2016 and 2041. National planning practice guidance says that the need to provide housing for older people is critical. The premise for this development is that it responds to an identified local need, increasing specialist housing provision on a site where there is an existing specialist C2 use. It would future-proof the only remaining care home in Earls Colne to ensure its retention and enhancement to serve the local community. The scheme before you today follows considerable engagement with officers of Braintree District Council, Earls Colne Parish Council and the local community. The scheme has a clean bill of health from the key statutory consultees, including the Highways Authority, LLFA, Ecology, Tree Officers and the Heritage Advisor from Place Services, who considers that, at most, the impact of the proposed development would be at the lower end of the less than substantial harm scale. Officers confirm that the green wall is an important feature of the scheme, which is why we are prepared to accept the proposed planning conditions that would secure the retention and long-term operation of the green wall. Kingsley Healthcare is mindful of the amenities of neighbouring residents, which is why we are prepared to accept a condition requiring the implementation of a construction management plan to ensure that any impacts would be kept to a minimum. Colne Valley Golf Club, a long-standing neighbour of the Colne House site, is supportive of our scheme. Tom Smith from the golf club is unable to join us and speak in support of the scheme this evening, but has asked that I relay the club's support for the proposed development to this committee. Your officers consider that the scheme accords with the development plan and that it would deliver substantive public benefits. The delivery of this specialist housing would help to meet need for care provision, which is widely established as carrying a very significant weight in the planning balance. It would improve facilities, the health, social and well-being of existing and future residents of the care home. New jobs would be created in the facilities construction and operation. Additional beds would secure the long-term viable use of this heritage asset, and overall, these planning benefits are significant and compelling to warrant the grant of planning permission now. Taking account of the above, we respectfully ask that you approve these applications today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Thank you very much indeed. That brings us to the end of members of the public wishing to make a statement. We'll go to the presentation on both parts of the application. Thank you, Tim, very much.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, members. Okay, so this is a joint presentation, as you've heard, and it's for internal and external alterations to Colne House, which is the Grade 2 listed building, so that's the listed building elements of it. Then it's for the demolition of the existing 5-bed annex building and the construction of the new 2-storey extension with the underground link. And that will provide a net gain of 27 additional bedrooms. And then there's the associated car parking, sustainable drainage and hard and soft landscape elements. So site location plan, application site outlined in red as usual. This is Colne House here, which is the Grade 2 listed building. The annex is the smaller building here, And then you can see you've got quite substantial grounds around the building. The access is taken from Station Road, which is down here, and then the golf club access runs along this road here. So, site access, we're looking at Station Road on the left of the photo. This is the main access into this whole area. On the right-hand side is the relatively adjacent new housing development. And then as you turn left in here, you either go into the golf club or straight on into Colne House, which we'll see in a moment. So here it is, straight on into Colne House. So the actual application site is behind the red car in this land here, but that's the main entrance. Some photos of the site interior. So on the left, you can see Colne House starting to come into the shot here. This is the end of the driveway that leads to Colne House, and this is the area of land which is the developable area, proposed developable area. The other photo, we've got the annex, which is the red brick building to be demolished, and then Colne House on the right. Just a close-up photo of the annex, and a close-up photo of Colne House. It's quite important just to highlight this is the front elevation. This is the principal elevation. Site interior, I mentioned that it has quite extensive grounds, and this is part of them here, and then again, then moving around to the edge of them here. So that's the area where the new building is proposed. And then looking back across, this is actually taken from standing on the access road that runs to the golf club, looking back across the grounds. This elevation of Colne House is its side elevation, so the front elevation is round this side, and the drive that leads to it is on the left side of the photo here. The other point to note on this photo that you can just see is the gradient. There's quite a significant change in levels, which is marked by that slope there, but it is quite substantial. Proposed site layout. So the listed building here, the newly proposed building here, the underground or partially underground link joining the two buildings is there. And then we've got a new parking area, and then to the rear is where the private amenity space would be for the new building, although obviously the whole grounds are all shared. So proposed elevations, in a moment I'll go to some CGI imagery which is a bit clearer, but in terms of just the standard elevations, the front elevations and the side elevations, the front with the green wall. Then more elevations. You can see Colne House is with the pitch roof and the chimneys, and then anything with the flat roof, you're looking at the new building. And on the right here, you can just see the underground link. So basically, when you're looking from the private garden area at the back, you'd be looking at this sort of side elevation here, which would be glazed. When you're looking from the front elevation of Colne House and the driveway into Colne House, because of the levels difference, it would appear as though it was essentially an underground link. And again, it's here in this central photo. So you can see the listed building consent deals with internal alterations and amendments as set out in the reports. There's no real changes to Colne House on the exterior, relatively speaking. And then we have the floor plan. I haven't included all the floor plans, so I've just taken a couple of examples. So we've got the ground floor here of the new building with all the bedrooms here. There are then various communal areas, and then the private garden at the back. And then I've also just included what's called the lower ground floor, but the reason for including it is it shows that linkway and how that would function. So you come out of the new building through this link, and then there's a stairs and a lift to get into Colne House here. So I mentioned that CGI imagery, and this is it. So this is standing on the driveway into Colne House on the left, and the new building with its green wall curving around here, new proposed parking area, and then a straight-on shot just at the front elevation, and then a shot of the rear garden. So this is that private rear garden at the back, and that is the back of the underground link. So when I said you'd see the area, so it would appear more like as it wasn't underground from the back, that's what you're looking at there. The rear elevation, facing onto the private area. And then just another shot of the front elevation. So, in summary, this is a scheme that complies with the adopted development plan policies. Limited harm to the heritage assets being identified, that officers consider that's outweighed by the public benefits of the scheme. It would provide clear and significant social and economic benefits. There is limited visual and residential amenity impact. We have no objections from statutory consultees, and on that basis it's recommended that both Planning Permission and listed building consent is granted. I've got two brief updates for members that are just in relation to the conditions. So condition 11 of the Planning Permission, the applicant has just requested that that is tweaked to allow some development to take place before condition 11 kicks in. So it would be no development above slab level. That's on condition 11, which is the landscape condition. And then condition 8, listed building consent. This is really a point of clarification, but again, it's the green text that will be inserted. So all new work and finishes or works of making good to the existing building. So it's just so that there's no ambiguity with the wording of that condition. And that's all the updates I have. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Tim. Sorry, I'm just making notes of what we're changing. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is in my ward. I know the site very well. It's not very far from where I live in the village. And I'm pleased to see this come forward. As a care home, it's already, I think, well regarded locally. And I would like to say that the applicant has made really good effort to work, not just with officers. I understand that has been a beneficial relationship, but also with the local community. They gave a presentation some time ago to the parish council, which was much appreciated, and I know the parish council are in favour of this. I like the design of the new annex, the new care home. I think it's sufficiently different without looking out of place. I would just like to reiterate one point, and I know there is a condition on this. I think it's condition 10 on the living wall. It is really important that that is maintained and kept going, because if it fails and it starts to die off, it's going to look horrible. So, I think can't emphasise enough that it's really important that that is maintained. But I do think the design, it is a bit different. It's quite innovative, but I think for me it will blend in well. It is a really nice setting in the village here. I mean, I know the site quite well. I've walked around there a few times. Backs onto the golf course. The gardens are lovely. So I think all of that will stay in place. I think, I agree with the architect. We won't be sorry to see the existing annex go and to be replaced with with something nicer. It's also good to have the additional rooms. There is no doubt that this sort of facility is really needed. I don't think there is anything else particularly that I need to draw attention to. There was one thing, actually. This is, strictly speaking, not a planning matter, but just out of interest. Do we know, are the current residents going to remain in situ while the work is carried out? I know that construction work is noisy and disruptive, but I also know that moving people, particularly if they are elderly and not particularly well, can also be quite confusing. I would just be interested to know whether the plan is that people will stay where they are while the work is being carried out. Do we know?
I'm afraid we don't know the answer to that, actually. We could ask for that to be outlined in the construction management plan, but I don't know the answer.
Yes, please. I say it's not strictly probably a planning.
I'm sorry, I can't let you speak at this time. All right, it's my last night. I will ask you.
Yes, they'll stay in place.
They will.
It's designed that way so you can build them.
Thank you.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you. I appreciate that. And actually, that would have been my preference. I think it's, on balance, it's more disruptive for people to be moved somewhere unfamiliar and then moved back again. So that's good to hear. All in all, I think this is a yes, really good design. It's well thought out. It's been a little while coming forward, but that's good because, you know, quite a lot of thought has gone into it. So I'm happy to move officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, and that's with the change of the wordings on condition 11 in it.
Yes, it is.
Does it find a seconder, Councillor Mann, and you have requested to speak, so I'll let you speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with everything that Councillor Sprayers has said. We've got a special responsibility as a committee to look at the supply of specialist housing like this. Interesting fact buried in the report, Braintree area has the highest expected percentage increase in the number of people with dementia in the country.
Oh,
well, there's a record we weren't necessarily looking for, but we've got to think about it in our future plans. There's a great deal of new build here, and I did worry about overdevelopment, but having seen, you know, the size of the overall plot, it can take it, I think. So I'm you know, very happy to support the application, Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone wish to add anything new further? Thank you, Councillor Swear. Then I'll come to you, Councillor Abbott, afterwards. Councillor Swear.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Overall, I agree with the comments made, and I think it's really interesting how frequently we have planning applications coming before us asking about infrastructure. I actually see this as part of that infrastructure delivery that so many people in the locality are asking, because it is a semi-medical facility, and it is something that will be increasing in need, as we know from the data and our stats across the district as a whole. So it's really important that we do have these facilities, as we've just heard from Councillor Mann as well, from the stats on the data. But the future proofing is really essential. And what is so good about this is the space. The new design is excellent, but actually for the mental and well-being of those residents that will be there, presumably for some of them a considerable time, to have that ability to walk around, to have that ability in that environment that is not too much under pressure from building, but actually to be able to appreciate the open spaces around there that will help considerably to their mental well-being and physical well-being, and also for the staff that work there as well in the longer term. The ease of access, it's the right place in a significant village across the district as well, so it's got lots going for it. Just 2 points. Could I ask officers for verification, because of the medical, will we be seeking assurances that these buildings and all of the facilities there, the rooms and those that will be used in the new building, will have full fibre and not just the fastest broadband speed? And the other one is with regard to EV charging as well. I think there's an opportunity here where we ought to put that in, as the applicants have said they're interested in future-proofing the building, so I think we should do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sheff. I'll just wait for the officers to come back with your queries before I move on to Councillor Abbott.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. I think Chris and I will answer that between us. If
okay, fine.
I think the EV charge points, we were discussing this earlier. I think at the moment the best we can do essentially is ask for an EV strategy and essentially require further information and then deal with it by way of condition. But I don't think we're at the point yet where we can secure exactly what you're asking for. In terms of the fibre broadband, did you want to chip in on that one, Chris?
Yeah, so just going back on the fibre broadband, I think we had this at a previous meeting, so I think the reason for the wording of the condition is that's certainly the intent, that's what we want to achieve, but it's, again, taking account of local, if there was any restrictions to achieving that. So we could have linked informative to make that absolutely clear, but that's the clear intent in terms of what we're trying to seek and secure through the condition, Councillor Schweer. And if I may, just a point of clarification, just the point from Councillor Spray previously on the construction management plan, mindful of the answer from the applicant, would members want a reference to having regard to the residents within the construction management plan that comes forward as part of that condition, given they will be remaining on site?
Yes, if possible. Yes, please.
Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, just very briefly, I'm going to support this application, and for the reasons that the speaker said, we do need these facilities. We're going to increasingly need these facilities. And this site has got the space to do what is being proposed. It's not as cramped as some sites we see, so I don't think there's an issue there. There is lots of trees, and that phrase is in there again on page 62, but having seen the photographs, I could see some of the trees on this occasion weren't in such good health. I don't know when that photograph was taken, but I know last summer didn't help a lot of trees. And in this case, as I say, the site is large. There's going to be proposed 34 new trees planted. And could I just say to officers, it is helpful that in this report at 11:43 we do have a schedule, and that's always really helpful, because if those of us who are particularly interested in this issue can see that, maybe that answers some of the questions we might have asked ourselves. And then just finally, Madam Chairman, condition 14, bats and lights, the old wording has crept in again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Condition 14, John. Anyone else? Yeah. Well, it has been moved and seconded that we approve this application with a change of wording in condition 11 and 8, with an informative recharging points and full fibre, and putting the condition 14 on the bats into the correct wording. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you, members. And thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much. EV charging is included in the report.
I thought so. Sorry, it's a big report, this one.
I'm not saying anything new.
300 pages. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Point of order, Chair.
On the listed building.
Oh, yes, sorry. So sorry. We now need to approve the listed building consent. All those in favour? Oh, it has to be moved and has to be moved and seconded first.
I'll move it.
You'll move it. Councillor Abbott will Councillor Mann will second it. All those in favour? Thank you very much. That is also approved. Thank you. It's when they come and talk to you. That now brings us on to application 5E and 5D and 5E. Once again, we're going to take these two applications together with one presentation, and that they are application numbers 2201881 DAC, land east of Periwinkle Hall, Links Road, Perry Green, Bradwell, and application 2300395 DAC, land east of Periwinkle Hall, Links Road, Perry Green, Bradwell. And they can be found on pages 121 to 188. And I don't have any speakers, so we'll go straight to the presentation, which is going to be made by David. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening,
Matthew,
members.
sorry. What's wrong with me tonight?
So, discharge of condition applications, we call them DACs, are not usually reported to Planning Committee, as they usually relate to technical matters requiring approval once something has been approved Planning Committee. So normally relate to technical matters. These DACs, I'm going to keep referring to them as DACs, hope that's okay, are the exception. Members hopefully remember that, I think it was not December this year, but December last year, there was an application for a 35 megawatt solar farm, and it was approved here at this committee using the Rochdale envelope principles, which seek to secure maximum parameters with the finer details being secured through condition. And that committee requested that those finer details be reported to committee with regard to conditions 3, which is for the details of the solar panels and its associated paraphernalia, and also the landscaping, which is condition 6. Just to make it absolutely clear, no other conditions were required to be reported to the planning committee, and many conditions have already actually been discharged as per normal practice. So all members have been asked to consider this evening is those details relating to condition 3. I've included condition 4 because it was submitted with condition 3 for completeness, and condition 6. Just as a reminder, so the red line of the site is set out on the plan there. It's 50.49 hectares. Bradwell is to the northeast, Coggeshall is to the northwest, Silver End is to the south, and Cressing is to the southwest. And they've got the Links Wood, which is there, and the Jubilee Plantation as well. I just want to point out in the committee report, the location plan actually is incorrect, as it includes a few parcels of land to the east towards Bradwell that were actually removed when the application was first considered. So what was before you on the screen is very much what was approved at the planning committee in terms of the red line site boundary. Just to make members aware of that. I've also included, just for reference really, a copy of the development zone plan, which was approved by members, and that sets out the maximum parameters which the solar panels could be within when it came forward as part of the final details, which now we have. And I think it's worth pointing out at this stage that when we considered the application at the time, if the development was contained within the maximum parameters, then impacts such as highways, neighbour impacts, etc., have all been considered overall to be acceptable. So if the proposals are within those parameters, then all we're really considering is just the siting of the panels and the paraphernalia. Anything to do with that neighbour impact has already been considered, if that makes sense. Okay, so conditions 3 and 4 then, so we'll start with those. So this is the submitted plan and shows the solar panel configuration, and it also shows some of the associated paraphernalia, which I'll show you in a bit more detail, but you can see some of the inverters, so these little black blobs on the screen. You've got the solar panels themselves, which are in the blue, which, as you can see, are organised in rows. We may fill in the next slide, just you'll see a bit more of a zoomed-in version of it, but that's essentially what they are going to be in terms of their positioning. And you've got the access road internally, which is this sort of orange colour, which goes around through the site from Links Road up here, where it's accessed from. And then you've got some fences, and the public rights of way are respected as per the original parameters. I think it's worth pointing out at this stage that as part of this solar farm development, there are no batteries proposed. Some solar farm developments do have batteries, and I think it was originally envisaged that this would have a battery or batteries, but it's been confirmed that this one won't have any batteries on the site. So just to make members aware of that. Yeah, so as I said, sort of more zoomed in plans. Hopefully that's a bit clearer in terms of the sort of array, or some of the array of the solar panels anyway. And I've quite crudely labelled some of the different things on the plan. So you've got the sort of main substation up here, district network operator substation, and then you've got some of the other buildings down the bottom here, and the inverter there, and then the rest of them are just the transformers and inverters, they're called. So the access track, public right of way, and then the sort of orangey colour is the fence that will go around it. And in terms of the hard surfing access tracks for condition 4, the report on page 147 sets out how the proposal will comply with the Essex fire requirements in terms of like size, moving, etc. So I'll just briefly take you through what some of the things are going to look like. So these are the solar panels. Most of the information is in the report, the dimensions and the colour on page 145. So I won't repeat what's already in there. But just taking you through some of these things. So the solar panels would be 3 metres high at the highest point here, and 4.2 metres in width. This is the DNO substation, the district operative substation. It looks more like a traditional building, but it's really a container. It can be coloured in bottle green. The customer substation, slightly bigger, but essentially it's the same in a moss green. The spare part container is a container, looks like a container. Is in bottle green as well. And then the O&M building, so just want to point out that in the report it refers to it as a Q&M building, but that's actually a drafting error. It should be an O&M building. It stands for operational maintenance. It's the buildings that the engineers use when they go on the site. It contains a communication hub, small storage container, and on-site office, so I'm told. And there's only one of these. And there's one spare part container, one customer service station, and one DNO station. So the only thing there is multiple of is the inverters, which you'll see next, which convert the current that they make in direct current to alternate current to then go into the grid. Obviously, that's made from the solar panels. Security fencing, fairly self-explanatory with the CCTV camera, and then the gates that would allow access from the internal access tracks to the inverters. And then you've got the condition 6, the landscaping plan. Again, I won't dive too much into the detail. Obviously, that's set out in the report, and even the report's condensed from the that documentation that was submitted with the application. But the submitted landscaping plan seeks to accord with the parameters which were secured at the planning application stage. What's happened since then is that they've put all those measures in, for example, making sure that the hedges are improved and managed to 3 metres high, but also gapped up where some of the hedges where they need to be gapped up to take into account the position of the panels, which are now obviously for approval. So some of the things, you've got additional native species, along hedge planting on public right of way, but 15 metres offset from the solar panels. New areas of major hedgerow to restore the field boundaries, replenishing gaps in existing hedgerow, etc. Again, as the landscaping plan accords with the parameters set out at the application stage, then issues such as landscape impact have already been assessed to be acceptable and not reassessed as part of this DAC. What we're looking at is, I suppose the key thing is probably making sure that the management of said landscaping is secured for the lifetime of the solar panels, which are 40 years. And the land management scheme has been submitted with the application. I won't sort of go into those details, but they're on page 130 and include watering, replacing any frail trees and hedges as necessary, etc., etc. So, in officer's opinion, the landscape plan and management plan are acceptable and unable to discharge the condition. I'll just very briefly summarise. So, the principal development's already been established, as I've said. All we're considering tonight is the conditions 3, 4 and 6. The solar panels conform with the maximum parameters. The additional paraphernalia which I showed you, for example, the inverters, comply with the maximum parameters. The access tracks are designed to accommodate the fire trucks and large HGVs as been required by Essex Fire Services. And the landscape is in accordance with the principle secured with a long-term management plan included. So the recommendation for members this evening is to agree that conditions 3, 4 and 6 can be formally discharged. which means they can be approved essentially. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Matthew. Members. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Matthew. I just have some questions regarding particularly the landscaping plan. So first of all, obviously the Essex Way runs right the way through the middle of the site, which is quite a significant footpath. So to be honest, I didn't find the documents that have been provided by the applicant particularly helpful or sufficiently detailed. I wonder whether you could we could pull up the landscape plan so I can explain. I think my concern is that there are parts of that footpath where the hedge is planted so close to the footpath, in particular near the Jubilee plantation, where there seems to be a very narrow gap between what is quite a substantial ditch, because I did go and look at the site initially, yes, up there, and the hedge planting. There is in the section, yes, that sort of the right hand arrow there, because there is a ditch, I think, along there, and the blue line is the footpath. So I'd like to know how wide is the space between the ditch and the hedge. I would also, on that particular plan, it does talk about a 15-metre buffer either side of the footpath. Is that going to be right the way along that footpath, or only in a certain section? If it's only in a certain section, why is it not along the whole of the footpath? The second point I would like clarification is, again, I just don't find this document that's been produced by the applicants anything like detailed enough. There are arrows showing where the hedge is going to be gapped up at the top. Certainly when I drove around the site, there were some other areas I thought where additional planting should be put in place. So is the applicant proposing, or are the conditions proposing, that the entire site, where there is hedgerow around the perimeter of the site, that any gaps will be filled up right the way around that site? As you see, right at the top of that plan, there's an arrow there gapping up of existing hedgerow. Well, are they talking about just that tiny section, or are they talking about the road that goes round to the right-hand side of that plan? The third question I have is, when you look at the maintenance, it says this planting of the additional hedgerows and so on, and trees and all the other additional planting they're going to be doing won't be carried out until construction has been completed. Why are we not asking for this kind of screening to be put in place in advance of construction? I don't think it would necessarily inhibit the construction of the solar panels. But given that the solar panels are going to be 3 metres high, I would have thought, the earlier we can get the planting in and get it growing, the less time there will be when the solar farm is not screened. So those are the 3 points I have. Just one other further point, actually, in the maintenance plan. It says at the end of 40 years, the farmer will restore the site. I don't know whether that is a condition that is part of the landscaping plan, or whether that's anything that we can. Is that something that we enforce? How does that work? Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I just hope in 40 years' time we've forgotten. Yes, please, Matthew.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. A lot of questions there. So I'll start with the last one first, as it's fresh in the memory. There's a condition, I believe, on the original application which sets out the 40-year time span of the solar panels, and I believe that condition then requires them to put the land back once it's served its purpose, the development. So it wouldn't be part of the landscape condition per se. It would be sort of tied up within the sort of parent permission, if you will. So your question, why was the screening not in place in advance of construction? I was just trying to find the condition to see what that actually said. So I might come back to you on that, just in terms of, obviously, we're bound by the condition wording in some respects on that question. So I'll hopefully come back to that a bit later, if that's okay, as we go. So I think where they're gapping up the hedgerow, that's where it needs to be gapped up. They're adding quite a lot of native trees to some of the other hedgerows, which are obviously within the parameters of what was previously secured on the boundaries in order to mitigate the impact of the panels. So everything that they're doing accords with what was previously proposed. I guess what the difference is now is that actually some of the internal hedgerows are sort of accommodated to be better, perhaps, than what they were now the positions of the panels are known. In terms of the first question about the distance between the ditch and the hedge, I couldn't tell you without measuring it. I'm not sure if one of my colleagues would be able to measure it, but I suppose what I would say is the plan is deceptive in that it's 50 hectares. It's a big site. What might seem a small distance on the plan actually is quite a big distance in actuality. So I'll just sort of flag that. I missed the second part of the question about the hedge along the footpath. What footpath were you referring to? Is that the Essex Way?
Well, the footpath that goes through the site, most of it is the Essex Way. There is a section of footpath with an arrow pointing right in the middle of that plan. I think additional nature species hedge planting using sort of long PR, public right of way, 15 metres offset to solar panels. So there's 15 metres offset solar panels along that section of footpath. Why have you not got that offset? Maybe you do on the rest of the footpath. I think my chief concern is that the section where the ditch is, between the ditch and the, is that sufficiently wide enough for the Essex Way? It's where you've got your cursor there now, just along the top of Jubilee Wood. Just to the right of Jubilee, along there. I mean, this is sort of my problem with this plan, is that it's just impossible to ascertain the answer to these questions from that plan, which is the only document we've got.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I might defer to one of my colleagues then and see if they can do a measure on that and see what it says, see what it is. If we can't, then it might be that something we have to come back to you on. But I'll leave that and see. We'll have a quick discussion between us. Was that all of the questions? I know that I was going to come back to you on on something else. Was that all of them for now?
Yes, thank you, Matthew.
It says it's going to provide effective screening. Page 125. three of them.
We're just checking the distance.
I just thought, page 125, it seems. Ensure that trees, hedges and grass are all suitably maintained. Consider the proposed landscape built upon principles. He didn't answer the measurement question, did he? Of the path. I thought you asked about the measurement of the path. To interfere with the Essex Way.
Yeah, okay.
You with it?
Yeah, can I?
Yes, carry on.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Apologies, members. Grateful for your patience on that. So, colleagues have just checked to try to scale from the plan. So, I think it's going to be impossible for us to accurately do that based on the scale of the plan to give the distances. So, given Councillor Parker, I think the issues that you've raised, I think members have got probably a couple of options in terms of how to move forward with the application this evening. Obviously, it's within members' gift whether to resolve to approve the DACs, or obviously the other two options is to defer consideration or to refuse. An alternative option, if members were minded with the principles here but had specific concerns around the detail, would be to resolve to grant permission, but subject to very prescriptive caveats around additional information coming in to address those points. So, for instance, one of those points was around the boundary of the site. You were mentioning about there's some reference to the infilling of gaps within the hedgerow. If members would like to make it clear that that is an infilling that would have to go around the entire perimeter of the site, providing obviously it doesn't cross over any access or so forth, but if that's the point of clarification and what members would like to achieve, then I think we could cover that off. So post-committee, we then go back to the applicant and say that we'd want the submission to be updated to make that point clear. But we'd need to be very clear on the prescriptive wording that was agreed by the members this evening, so we could effectively, as officers, go away and action that. Similarly, the point about the public right-of-way and the distances between the hedge. I'm assuming, Councillor Parker, the primary concern there is about the distance and potential encroachment on the public right-of-way. Is that where?
Yes, I mean, given the fact that I think it's really the usability of the public right-of-way, that it's wide enough for people to use. I mean, we did have this issue coming up the other day, but I mean, it is the Essex Way, and I think just to have a sort of 3 foot muddy track between what will be a 3 metre high hedge and a ditch is not very attractive for people to use. So I'd quite like to understand how wide that section of the path is going to be. And the other point I still would also like clarification on is why we're not requiring the planting to be done before construction. I don't know whether you're able to address that one there.
So on the 2 points, so just coming back on the public right of way, so again, obviously it's up for members to decide how you want to proceed this evening, but again, if members were minded to resolve to grant, we could require further detailed plans to come forward in addition to this, because I take the point about the adequacy of that plan to enable you to make an assessment. But we could then go away to look at the specific planting and the distance to the public footpath to ensure there isn't that encroachment given the height. And if members have got a view about the distance, again, that's something we could put in perhaps as a minimum. On the point about the timing of the implementation of the landscaping scheme, so the original condition, Part B of the condition, which is on page 128 of your agenda, that details, programme detailing the timing of the landscaping works in relation to the phasing of construction. So again, on that specific point, unless Matt advises me on saying something incorrect here, again, if members would want it clarified so that planting comes earlier, then again, that's something that we could go back to the applicant on as I said, that would be in the context of resolving to grant subject to those. The alternative is deferral of the DAX. The risk, I think, as I'm aware from the applicant, is the timing and the potential implication, but it is obviously a decision for this planning committee this evening to make. So I think those are the options available, but I was just trying to find a way forward given the likely time before we'd be able to report the matter back, obviously, to planning committee. But I'll leave that with members, but that's just a suggestion in terms of how we could resolve some of those comments, Councillor Parker.
We could vote on one of the one we could get one out of the way.
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking primarily about the landscape.
Yes, we could get at least get one out of the way, couldn't we? I know, Councillor Mann.
Well, we can vote on them all, Chair, and use the time-honoured phrase, subject to the satisfaction of officers, that they put forward their proposals on all these points, and we delegate to officers their final outcome. So if officers are satisfied, it goes ahead, and it doesn't go ahead until they are satisfied.
Yeah, that's what we could do it, yes. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Obviously not revisiting the principle, but I think I know this piece of land very well. I used to represent it as district councillor until the boundary change when Bradwell went into a different ward. I think going forward, again, speaking in general terms, the tension between the need to grow food in this country and the need to generate energy is going to increase, and this is a classic example because this is very good quality farmland. That's all I'll say on that point because I know the principle's been made. I'm pleased to see that infrared CCTV is going to be used. I'm assuming that means no visible light was needed for the cameras, and I wish other developers would do the same, because you do not need to blast everything with white LED light to be able to have CCTV cameras to work. And obviously if you don't need to do that, you also save money because you don't have to have the lights and use the energy. It was actually on the landscaping that I had concerns, actually not exactly the same concerns as Councillor Parker, but the lack of detail on the plans was an issue. But also the species mix. I thought the species mix was quite narrow, so they haven't got, I can't see anything, well it says, I think the list there is the same as in the report. So there's no Gelder Rose, there's no small leaf lime, there's no elder, there's no holly, which of course is evergreen and will give you a bit more cover in the winter. And I agree with the point about getting it in, especially, I mean, I suppose if they're going to construct, they don't want to be planting in areas where it would get in the way of the construction. But in the areas where they're not, the perimeter areas, I would agree with the point to get it in as early as possible and obviously at the right time of year to give it the best start. So, yeah, I'd like to see more detail on the landscaping, but my point was more to do with the species. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. I need someone to move something. Well, I will move 23/00395 DAC. That's the one, that's the buildings. Does that find a seconder? Because we've got to move on. Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Beavers. So I'm going to put that one to the vote. All those in favour of that one? Okay, that is unanimous. Thank you. Now we come back to how we're going to word.
My only concern about trying to grant permission with subject, as Councillor Mann suggested, is just requiring the timing of the planting. Are we able to deal with that? I mean, obviously, I think we certainly Councillor Abbott agrees with me that we should get the planting in, as much of the planting as is possible to get in, as soon as possible in the next planting season, not wait till after the panels, all the panels have been constructed. But again, subject to, there will probably be some areas of internal hedges that would be a nuisance if they were, planted before construction has taken place. I don't know whether is it possible to have those two options in some way.
To say planting where possible that will not be disturbed by the. Yeah.
Okay.
So are you going to be moving all of this because?
Well, I will
go through it gradually.
Be happy to move those to move this, subject to
Planting where possible.
planting as to be done before construction where possible. The gapping up of the hedge to be done around the perimeter of the site where there is the whole of the site where there is to be hedging. No, I've forgotten my. Oh yes, it was the to make sure there is adequate distance between the hedge that's surrounding the panels and the ditch, particularly near Jubilee Wood. Or I should just make sure that the width of the footpath is adequate. I suppose those are my three questions. And Councillor Abbott may also want to say something about the mix of species.
I'd be happy to second that if we could include to widen the species mix, particularly with those ones which are all species which do grow in the area as well. Do you want me to list them again, or you've got Gelder rose, small leaf lime, elder, and holly.
Members, I hope you all took that all in because I don't have what to repeat it all again. It's regarding planting where possible prior to infilling of the gaps and clarification on the width of the Essex Way path where we can see it's narrow. And this will come back to officers for their. Yeah. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Back to my agenda. Now brings us on to application 5F, which is application 22-02283, full land north of Colchester Road, Whittam, can be found on pages 189 to 274, and I do have a speaker. Can I invite Mr. Lee Mullin to the table to make his presentation? Sorry you've had a long wait.
Not as long as you. Thank you, Chair. Evening, everyone. My name is Lee Mellon. I'm a director with Strutton Parker, and we act as the applicant's planning consultant. Following this committee's resolution to grant planning permission in December, the applicant has been working closely with the council officers to finalise the Section 106 agreement. In working through the delivery of the Section 106 obligations, it has been necessary to make some very minor changes to the delivery triggers set out in the previous report to committee, to address the practicalities of delivering the cycle link and the off-site element of the biodiversity net gain. The cycle link has been affected by the A12 widening works to be undertaken by National Highways. Land along the entire southern boundary of the site will effectively be requisitioned by National Highways to deliver the works and will be driven by their own agenda and timetable. Discussions with National Highways have been undertaken to facilitate the final part of the link. The applicant will secure and protect the link up to the boundary with National Highways land. The off-site biodiversity net gain proposals will be secured by the applicant, but as originally drafted, there was no fallback or default mechanism to ensure that the BNG would still be delivered should there be any issues, no matter how unlikely that may be. The proposed mechanism would provide the comfort for both the developer and the council that the BNG would be delivered in all circumstances. The mechanism is effectively a safety net to ensure that the proposed development can proceed and that the off-site biodiversity net gain will also be delivered. The trigger for approval of off-site BNG has been changed from pre-commencement to prior to the occupation of the first building. This will ensure that the development can commence as soon as possible, helping to expedite delivery of the 350 jobs associated with the scheme. The provisions for BNG offsetting are still at a relatively early stage. The BNG provisions of the Environment Act don't come into force until November, and the enabling legislation and guidance is yet to be published. So whilst this application isn't formally caught by the requirements of the Act, the applicants and council officers have worked hard to create a workable solution that will deliver a 10% biodiversity net gain, an approach to offsetting that we think creates an exemplar scheme for others to follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. This application is also going to be presented by Matthew. Matthew, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Short presentation, this one. As has been said, it's been before you this evening for the erection 2B8 storage and distribution units. as I said, members resolved to approve the application in December. And the reason it's been re-reported, as been mentioned in public question time, is due to the changes that have had to happen with the Section 106 heads of term, which officers we wanted to put before members to approve or refuse. Therefore, so the only thing we're considering this evening, we're not repeating the considerations of the evening that we had in December. All members are being asked to look at this evening is the changes to the heads of term and condition 4, which obviously I'll show you and is set out in the report. Just as a reminder, so we're talking about the site on the edge of Eastwage, which is an allocated employment site. We've got existing A12 alignment at the bottom. And then this is what was resolved to grant in terms of the location of the two buildings. I won't dwell on that because obviously members have already resolved to grant it. So, so just to summarise the changes really, it's obviously set out in detail in the report, but you've got changes to the biodiversity off-site in the Section 106 agreement. So essentially, we've got a later trigger point for the biodiversity net gain scheme to be submitted and then provided. Originally, it was prior to commencement of development. Now it's going to, as I say, be the occupation of the unit, so it allows the discussions to continue, this scheme to be put forward, and as has been mentioned, it allows them to get on the site sooner. There is, we did check with the ecologist, and they were happy that the habitat on the site could be built on and then be provided on the other site at a later point with no issues. The condition 4 had reference to off-site works, but that's because that's covered by the Section 106. We're proposing to change it to make it to reference on-site biodiversity net gain only, just for avoidance of doubt. And then the changes to the cycleway footway provision, so removing the requirement for the developer to complete off-site works to make the connection with the new A12 scheme, because it would make sense if National Highways, when they're doing those works, make that connection rather than having to insist the developer goes onto their land to make that connection. So it would be unreasonable to do that. And then, because of the way that the site is, it's limited really to one possible route through to provide that connection. So the plan that's being put forward as part of the Section 106 agreement is essentially securing a cycleway footway link between point A and point B, point A on Eastways to point B with the new A12, and that yellow bit being the protected land, which would be retained for the provision of a cycleway footway, subject to agreement with National Highways with the connection. So it's very much that is what we're intending to provide. If that can't be provided by National Highways, then the applicant will have to seek to vary that at a later point. So just to summarise, it's not for reconsideration of the whole application, it's changes to the Section 106 agreement, as I've said, and condition 4. Officers consider the changes are minor and deliver what was originally envisaged when the application was first considered. I think that's the critical thing, albeit in a slightly different way. We're still getting the biodiversity net gain, we're still getting the cycleway footway, we just had to change it to basically make it practical to work with the constraints of the site. So the recommendation is that members continue to support the application, but with the change to the Section 106 agreement and condition 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think one of the changes is sensible, the division between Section 106 and the condition in terms of on-site and external biodiversity net gain. Obviously, that is an important distinction. Regarding the cycleway connection, which was something I proposed several years ago, given that we're going to have a new upgraded cycleway along the A12 from Whitton to Kelvedon, through the ward I co-represent. That seems sensible, and I hope that does happen, because it will be a lot safer for cyclists who come down there to dink up there through the industrial estate than to carry on to the Eastways Junction, which is very heavily trafficked and congested. So those bits, although it does create a little bit more uncertainty on the cycleway, I can understand it, because when national highways come in there, it's going to be a big time development, and they have extensive powers to take land and to do what they need to do with it, so I can understand that. However, I remain, I'll stay calm at this time, Madam Chairman, deeply unhappy about the complete evisceration of the biodiversity on this site, given that the first iteration of this proposal actually kept most of the hedges on the site, and the bund that is the current bund that acts as the landscape buffer to the northeast of the existing units. That bund was very carefully planned and hard fought for and won by the local community as a screening, and it's been incredibly successful. And as you come along there, particularly in the summer, it does provide a fantastic screening for what is a very large building that's there now, and that's all going to be lost. And what grieves me even more is the loss of the internal hedgerows, which are probably several hundred years old, and the way in which this authority has basically dismissed them and said, well, they don't matter, they can go, grieves me a lot. I mean, we talk a lot on this committee about trying to protect trees, but on this site, I don't know why the committee don't seem as keen. I am very keen that if we could, I know we can't now because permission's been given, I accept that, but I remain extremely grieved. And the loss of sites like this is one of the reasons why this country has such a problem with biodiversity. For the applicant agents to say this is an exemplar scheme, well, goodness help us if it's an exemplar, to remove literally everything on the site and to hope we can re-provide it somewhere else, that's not an exemplar. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As Mr. White pointed out, we are deciding on the recommendations that are in front of us this evening, mainly around the change to net diversity, the cycle footway, and the trail plan monitoring fee. Everything else has already been established through the decision that was made back in December. So therefore, with that in mind, Madam Chairman, I will move officers' recommendations on these points this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Just find a second. It does, Councillor Mrs. Spade. You wish to speak? Councillor Mann, were you right? No, you weren't. No. Okay. Anyone else wish to speak? But it has been moved and second that we grant these changes. All those in favour? Those against? One against. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, members. That now brings us on to application 23000152 Alt Cullen Mill, 49 Braintree Road, Witham. We found on pages 275 to 300. I do not have anyone wishing to make representation on this application, so we go straight to the presentation, which is going to be made by Lisa. Good evening and thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, members. This is an outline application with all matters reserved for redevelopment of the site involving the demolition of the existing building and the erection of 10 residential units and amenity, and it's at Cullen Mill, 49 Braintree Road in Witham. I've added this aerial photo here for a bit of context. So the application site is this white building here where my cursor is. You can see Morrison Supermarket to the northwest, the White Horse Lane public car park where my cursor is there, just slightly to the north, and you can there also see the proximity to Witham Station and the town centre to the south. Members may recall and will note from the committee report that this is the second outline application for all matters reserved for 10 residential units at the site, with the earlier application being refused on very similar grounds. So here we can see the location plan, the site edged in red. You can see that pedestrian access and any vehicular access would be taken via White Horse Lane. To the north here, where my cursor is, permission has been granted for extensions and conversions of the building to form 10 residential units, and we'll see some photographs shortly that work is commencing. These two buildings here, Cullen Mill buildings, are Grade 2 listed and they're in residential use. And then these adjacent uses here, 49, and these two other buildings within Cullen Mill are also within existing residential use. and then we've got some single-storey commercial units to the south. So here are some existing elevations. You can see it's a single-storey building. It's not considered to positively contribute to the character of the area, and there's no objection to the demolition in principle of this building. Turning to the proposed block plan, the application, of course, is in outline, all matters reserved. So this is very much indicative, showing just one way in which the amount of development could be accommodated. So here we can see in grey is the siting of the building, and the areas in green are where they're showing potential areas of amenity space. The development has been presented as a car-free development, hence why there's no sort of indicative parking provision there. Officers, as detailed within the committee report, are concerned that these indicative plans would result in a development that is cramped and congested in its layout and fails to provide adequate amenity space, and would result in an overdevelopment of the site. Again, these are very much indicative elevations and just showing one way in which a building could accommodate 10 units. So we can see here it's a 3.5-storey building. They're proposing here that it could be a brick and render property, and we can just sort of see the design approach that they're suggesting could accommodate that amount of development. The application has been submitted with some existing proposed street scenes, so the one to the top is existing. Just noting that this building actually isn't there as existing, it is being constructed as such, so they're suggesting that this is what the future existing street scene would be. So we can see the listed Cullen Mill building here to the left-hand side in the dark, the taller one. The development here would be as approved under a separate planning permission, and then this is our application site here, and the single-storey building to the right-hand side of the existing commercial units. So again, on here you can see how the site is elevated from the B1018, and then to the south of the screen here, we can just see how the proposed building would fit within the street scene. So again, as detailed in the committee report, officers are concerned that to accommodate this quantum of development, the plans detail that the height of the building would be higher than the surrounding development and of a scale that would dominate the locality and the street scene, particularly given this elevated position here. We've got concerns that they would be over-dominant to these listed buildings and harmful to the setting of the conservation area, which runs along that B1018. So just looking at some photographs here, this is the existing building here, so you can see sort of the materials and single-storey nature and how it's elevated from the road. And we can just see here on the left-hand side the redevelopment of that adjacent building. And again, just another view of that there, just showing sort of the width and the height increase from the road and those single-storey buildings to the south. Here is a view just taken from sort of the other side now, so internal, just again looking sort of the character of the existing building. And here just seeing sort of how that building relates to those adjacent 2-storey residential units. This is a view now taken from White Horse Lane car park, so you can see the double pitch here of the building that would be demolished, and then in the foreground here where the scaffolding is that building that's being developed for 10 units. And just to the left-hand side, the 3-storey high Grade 2 listed buildings on Cullen Mill. So in regards to the planning balance, the conclusion, the adverse impacts relate to the capability of the site to accommodate the amount of development and failure to demonstrate a high standard of amenity and layout. We consider the development would appear cramped and congested and result in an overdevelopment. There would be harm to the setting of the adjacent conservation area and the Grade 2 listed buildings at Cullen Mill, and that harm is less than substantial, but no public benefits have been identified which outweigh that harm. As detailed in the report, there would be poor amenity for future occupiers, and the application again has been submitted with no noise or air quality assessment. And the application fails to submit mitigation in regards to open space, so that's a slight error there. So in terms of the RAMS payment, that has actually been paid up front. So the concern is really in regards to the lack of legal agreement to secure financial contributions towards off-site contribution for open space. In terms of the public benefits, the application would secure the delivery of 10 market dwellings. The site is also considered well placed for residential redevelopment, being a sustainable location within the town centre and with strong public transport connections. There would be some economic and social benefits with the development. And in terms of the overall planning balance, whilst the tilted balance of paragraph 11 is not considered to be engaged due to the harm to designated heritage assets, which provides a clear reason for refusing the development. Even if the tilted balance was engaged, it is considered that the adverse impacts set out would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the MPPF as a whole. And our recommendation this evening is that outline planning permission be refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think it might be possible for some form of residential development on this site, but this isn't it. It's trying to pack far too much in to what is actually quite an environmentally stressed site already. I know it extremely well. Over the years, various developments have happened in that area, such as the old Crittall site being knocked down and where Morrison's is now, and what is actually quite a successful block of flats next to Morrison's, I think, but that's got a lot more space around it. The Cullen Mill area, if you've ever been around there, is a very hard environment. It's just hard surfacing in the buildings. There's very little in terms of landscaping or green, and it's not that good an outlook for the residents who are there now. And I think whatever we can do in the future, we should be trying to significantly improve that. I don't know what the big trees were on their drawings. They don't exist. And I think they were shown on adjacent land which may not even be in their control. So I think that's artistic licence. In terms of car-free, I wouldn't be opposed to that if that can be done. I think in that location you could do car-free. We have had several in Witham Town Centre, which obviously does have excellent transport links. But I think in terms of this proposal, it is trying to do too much on the site. It would completely dominate there. I'd be very concerned also, as per the officer report, in terms of air quality and noise, which hasn't been properly assessed. I mean, that is next to the busiest road in Witham, and it's not far from there that it's not exceeding air quality limits, but the highest nitrogen dioxide levels in Witham are recorded just slightly further up the road near the railway bridge there, and it would also be subject to extensive noise for long periods of the day because traffic is very busy there and queues. So I think there's lots of reasons why, if this did come forward for residential, it would have to be extremely carefully designed rather than this, which is just trying to cram something in. So I'm more than happy to move officer recommendation to refuse, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Final second, does Councillor Mann, do you wish to speak?
I agree with all of that, Chair.
Okay. Anyone else? No.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I also agree with the officer's conclusion on this one. I think this is an outline application, but I think trying to squeeze 10 flats in a building on that site and provide appropriate amenity is too much. I particularly really don't like the idea of having bedrooms next to front doors either. I think that's right of the officer to pick that one up. And I think the fact that it is in an elevated position above the road would make a building that is 3.5 stories high seem particularly dominant in that location. So I completely agree with the overall conclusion. Thank you.
Well, it has been moved and seconded that we refuse this application. All those in favour of refusal? But once again is unanimous. Thank you, members. That brings us to the end of our planning applications. Members, Juliet is leaving us, and this is her last planning meeting, and I just, on behalf of us all, I'm sure we'd all like to wish her well. Yeah. All right, thank you. So I will now close the meeting at 17 minutes past 9. Thank you very much, members. Before you go,